I think I'm going to drop the best piece of advice your listeners are going to hear. You should not choose between growth and profitability. You should do both. You should do both those things, and your company will be worth more. You need to put in the work to help them understand that your intentions are good. In fact, your intentions are the same as their intention, which is to increase the value of this business, better serve your customers, and have some fun along the way, not live a miserable life along the way, right? If those are your intentions and you make them clear, and then you bring your ask. So I am asking you that instead of doing our offsite in Bali, we do it in Scottsdale. And here's why. It's going to save us $1.5 million. And we can then turn that $1.5 million into SDRs and 3 sales reps in London. And that's going to give us several $100,000 of bookings by the end of Q4. And now we're talking real dollars. What that means for you is your stock holdings go up, right? Sometimes you have to boil it down to those simple reasons, or people just won't come along with you.
Welcome to Turpentine Finance, a podcast where we talk with top founders and finance leaders about what it takes to architect success. Our guests speak candidly about big business inflections, market curveballs, and how they approach decision-making so that you have the tactics and mental models for when the pressure is on. I'm your host, Sasha Orloff, founder, CEO, and self-professed finance nerd. You ready? Let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dan Fletcher, and we're going to dive deep into the challenges of the CFO and most companies, growth versus profitability, how that changes across company stages and investors between maybe a VC or private equity, and obviously the infamous M&A and build versus buy, all of which Dan has a lot of experience with, and how he became excited about being the CFO of a company that helps other CFOs. And because there's no one right answer, I'm excited for you guys to get the advice of Dan about how to navigate this. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sasha. I think we can have a very fun conversation about a lot of stuff we love about CFOs and growth and profit, all the above.
I love it. All right, let's start with a fun one. Stakeholder management. So most CFOs have to manage multiple stakeholders and they have different needs. And that might be different from a founder or a founder CEO to business leads. How do we understand runway versus trade-offs and the board meetings again? So let's just start with the basics. What tips do you have for CFOs that are navigating multiple stakeholders? It's a part of the job. How do we do it well?
So I think it's important to identify the stakeholders first, and then we can talk about the tips with each of them and maybe share a couple funny stories. Your first and most important stakeholder is your CEO. And I think one area CFOs can mess up a little bit is forgetting that. That's your number one stakeholder. That's your boss. The board is also your boss, but your number one stakeholder is your CEO. But then let's get to the board. The board is a key stakeholder of a CFO. They depend on the CFO for risk management, reporting, candor, planning, all the things the CEO relies on them for as well. Those are probably your two most important stakeholders. But outside of that, you have, anybody who is an investor in the business. You have, so the shareholders. You have also anybody who's a lender to the business, suppliers. Then you have your own team under you. So it can at times feel like, being a dad with 8 kids and, you can't really play favorites, but they each need something different from you and none of them can be ignored.
I think so. That's a good call out. And so when you think about the importance of the relationship, especially between the CFO and the CEO, as you step into a new job, or for the audience who's stepping into a new job as CFO, what do you do to invest? How do you make that relationship great?
I think the more you can build a personal rapport and true trust on a human level, the better everything else will go. If we step back, the CEO has hired you in most scenarios and therefore understands who you are, where you've come from, ideally has some references and knows you're not a complete wacko, and has faith in your skill set and the competency you bring to the role. Assuming all of that is true, okay, we could set that aside, because if that's not true, we should have a different discussion about your career track. So assuming you're qualified for the role and your CEO can rely on you for completion of your mandate, then it just turns to the human side, which is in many ways more important. And I've seen it go sideways so many times, Sasha, where the CEO brings in a CFO. They don't know them that well, but they trust that their qualification, their network speaks for itself. And they just never hit it off on a personal level and never build that trust.
Where are places in your day-to-day where tensions are higher between? What are those conversations where tensions are higher? It sounds like maybe around budget cycle could be one of them. What are other?
I would say tensions are most high when expectations are not being met in the business, whether it's at an individual level or even worse, a company performance level, and tough decisions have to be made. We saw it last year and even this year in SaaS layoffs, in software as a service layoffs, but also supply chain issues for companies with a material product and all the way back to COVID now, which seems like ancient history, but isn't. A lot started vibrating when businesses started underperforming. And so that's probably the hardest. But you indicated that simple trade-offs often produce tension and conflict, and that's absolutely true. Businesses, by definition, have finite resources. And the CEO and the CFO work together with the execs to allocate those resources to place bets in key areas of the business. And those who don't get their case heard and supported are not going to be happy about that.
Oh man, there's so many ways to take this. I think first, let's do one more question on this topic before we sort of, I think, lead into the next one. So there's the actual work interactions between the CEO and the CFO, and that comes around budgeting or expectations and planning. And I'd love to get into a little bit more of that. Are there any other tips or tricks? How do you get to know and build trust with your CEO along the way, outside of just maybe the budgeting or the planning process? Do you have a framework for trust? Did you spend time together?
Yeah, so I think the framework is based, if you think about sort of a Maslow's hierarchy, and the basis of that has to be that you simply do your job, that you show up, that you're reliable, that the numbers are accurate, that the governance is handled right, risk management, all that. And then right above that, and I put that at the bottom because if you get that wrong, we can all go home. The company might be bankrupt, it might be sued. Right above that in the pyramid is the emotional, personal relationship, the human side of things. And the only way to do that is to get to know each other. So you have to put in the work to talk about things outside of work. You have to meet outside of work, grab coffee. If you choose to have an adult beverage or a tea, it doesn't matter. Get together and spend the time. Learn your boss's kids' names if there are kids in the equation. Learn your boss's hobbies. Learn what sports team your boss supports. And they'll do the same with you. And then you'll start to develop that relationship outside of the work environment. And look, that may seem obvious and just generally be a human. Seems like silly advice, but in our sort of fast moving, high stakes world, it can often get put a little bit in the background.
So let's take that and say, okay, we've built the trust and we're going through some of these exercises. One of the things that I think has changed a lot over the past couple of years, especially is the conversation of growth versus profitability, especially in sort of a post zero interest rate world. You've held leadership roles as CFOs in all sorts of different environments, including through this latest sort of change. How do you have those conversations and changes? Does that start with you? Does that start with the CEO? Does it start with the board? Where are those discussions of growth versus profitability?
I think I'm going to drop the best piece of advice your Allocate listeners are going to hear. You should not choose between growth and profitability. You should do both. You should do both those things, and your company will be worth more. But I'm being cheeky. I get a little exhausted by the growth versus profitability, but it's true. There is a trade-off, right? You can't always have both, and sometimes you need to lean in more on one than the other. And so now to your question, Sasha, I think those conversations, they need to be based on why it matters. So for the vast majority of software businesses, you're valued on revenue, hopefully recurring revenue. And so start with where you're valued. I mean, and pharma, that's true. But in other industries, in chemical and energy, you're going to be valued on profitability. So, if you are identifying your metric of value, right, what you're valued on, it is very likely that any type of statistical regression you'll run on public comps over time and whether you get paid more for growth, paid more for profit is going to map to that simple truth. You are valued on profit, you should increase earnings. You are valued on revenue, then it's going to be revenue growth and revenue predictability, and you should lean in there. For the vast majority of software businesses, it has changed though, which we can unpack if that's helpful.
Yeah, let's dive in. What's changed?
I think you'll hear it a million times, whether it's from Crunchbase or SaaStr, they'll publish these articles and they're right. It was growth at all costs, and you were rewarded for growth at all costs up until rates started to increase. So ZERP is gone; it's a thing of the past, and now cash flow and profit are cool again. I'm not the first person to tell you that. It's been beaten to death over the past 18 months, certainly, but there's some truth, I think, now that we're in the steady state, and truth in saying that it's balanced, right? So I think where I'm going with this, Sasha, is if you're valued on growth and revenue and recurring revenue and retention and all of that, you should always seek to optimize that metric within the boundary of not burning crazy amounts of cash or being deeply unprofitable. And so that's what these layoffs are all about. It's the rule of 40 that's maybe 2/3 growth, 1/3 profitability that everybody's looking for now. And, that's great because then not only is your revenue predictable, but you've got some path to cash flow break even, or ideally even predictable cash flows that are increasing over time.
So if we think about now growth versus profitability tactically, and we align around a common metric, say it's rule of 40 or whatever you do. Are we restructuring teams? Not layoffs, but are we aligning more resources towards different parts of the business than we were maybe 5 years ago?
I think the permission structures have changed. And what I mean by that is if you rewind back to, say, 2017, I think finance teams and even CEOs and certainly boards didn't have a lot of permission to ask the tough questions around cost because people would roll their eyes and say, what are we doing here? We're trying to double, triple the size of the business in a couple of years. You cannot be focused on the little things like what's our electricity bill and should we optimize our office footprint? And that permission structure has changed. You're now allowed to have those conversations. And furthermore, to answer your specific question, to link incentives to them. It's the Munger thing. You show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. So now we've started to reintroduce in things like the corporate bonus programs and reintroduce in individual MIP type things, and even in some type of sales incentive compensation, the quality of the deal. Right? We've been able to introduce those things back into the business. And I'll tell you what, you set the incentives and the rest really does take care of itself.
I love this. I agree as the CEO of multiple fast-growing companies that as a venture-backed founder, you are rewarded a lot on sort of the general growth. I love that the topic of the permissions of the CFO have changed a little bit. Let's say you're in a company that is growth at all costs and they're moving over. Any specific tips on how to think about approaching that conversation if you've never had that conversation before with your business leaders or your CEOs? How do you start introducing that? I think is it just a shuff like this is the new reality, let's go? Do you start easing it in slowly?
It's really important for the people who you would be having those conversations with, founders, highly qualified executives that work with the founders, that they understand the why and they believe it. It goes back to incentives. So if they've been trained that they should pursue growth at all costs and that's how you get paid, then they will behave as if nothing else matters. And they should. That's what makes them good at their job. So you need to bring them the analysis. You need to show them the R squared. You need to show them the valuations for balanced rule of 40 or rule of 40 skewed toward growth. And you need to say, this is where we are today. This is our valuation. And we're trying to go from A to B, from this place to this better place. And the way we get there is if we look more like this business. And now look around you and you can see what Meta is doing, what Snowflake is doing. All these businesses that have chosen to pivot to at least some measure of operational efficiency. And guess what's happened? The market has rewarded them. I mean, if you own those stocks, you see the layoffs and your heart hurts for the people who got caught up in them. And then you look at the stock price and you say, it may be a messed up world we live in, but this is the truth, that efficiency is rewarded from a financial perspective.
Let's take the opposite case now. Let's say you're a CFO, maybe a first-time CFO or in a VP of finance role, and the organization isn't recognizing this, and then maybe the company valuation is getting pummeled. Any advice for how to make that culture shift happen faster?
Mm-hmm. What a great question. This is a phenomenal question because it's very, very common that a CFO who drops into a business and doesn't yet have the same trust that you might have if you'd been there for a while and immediately starts beating the drum of profitability and discipline is if not laughed out of the room, then they will be somewhat shunned and there will be eye rolls, etc. This is sort of change management 101, right? So you go back to the stakeholder conversation we had about the CEO and taking time to build the trust and help that person understand where you're coming from and understand that you care. The same thing is true of the other executives and the budget owners. You need to put in the work to help them understand that your intentions are good. In fact, your intentions are the same as their intention, which is to increase the value of this business, better serve your customers, and have some fun along the way, not live a miserable life along the way, right? If those are your intentions and you make them clear and then you bring your ask. So I am asking you that instead of doing our offsite in Bali, we do it in Scottsdale. And here's why. It's going to save us $1.5 million. And we can then turn that $1.5 million into SDRs and 3 sales reps in London. And that's going to give us several $100,000 of bookings by the end of Q4. And that is valued at 6 to 10x. And now we're talking real dollars. And that what that means for you is your stock holdings go up, right? And you have to take the time. And what is it in, I forget the Jeremy Irons role. Is it margin call? When he says, speak to me as if I were a young child or a golden retriever, right? And it's meant to be condescending and funny, but sometimes you have to boil it down to those simple reasons, or people just won't come along with you.
I really like, as a CEO, my most fun conversations, I think, are back to your point about trade-offs. We could spend the money here or we can spend the money there. Well, the money is finite, just like the resources of the team. And very rarely is a decision just in isolation. We could do it, use money this place, or we could use money that place. One of the other places where this comes up quite a lot is in the M&A discussions. Sometimes M&A is to help expand the TAM of a business or find an adjacent opportunity. Sometimes it's about just expediting work that you could do yourself, but it's sort of faster or more market appropriate. I know you've been a part of at least one M&A. Can you talk a little bit about what's the best way that a CFO or finance team should be involved in those discussions?
I would say if you have a highly qualified and competent management team, that the CFO may be involved more in the middle of the funnel, in the sense that you may have a corp dev person or the CEO or the chief product officer who will be driving more of the strategic questions around M&A. It's ultimately a roadmap question, right? Start at the why. The why we would go do M&A in the vast majority of situations, it will increase the value of our business and it will do it quicker than building it internally. Then you get to, well, why will increase the value of our business? Well, we think we can cross-sell that product into our install base at a 30% penetration rate over the next year. And that is worth XYZ financially, right? And so then they bring it to the CFO and they say, figure out how to make this happen financially. And so that's one way to do it. The other way to do it would be a CFO is saying it's purely a financial play. We need X amount of EBITDA and we're not going to get there ourselves. So we need to go find businesses that have the ability to realize cost synergies without jeopardizing growth or at least stability on the top line. And we need to do some financial engineering to, 1 + 1 = 3. And in that case, the CFO might be more at the tip of the spear.
Any advice for people that are a first-time CFO who might not have an experienced dev team, might not have any experience themselves about how to navigate these discussions? The CEO maybe says, I want to acquire this company for whatever reason. Let's say it checks all the boxes. Any tips or lessons learned on what went well or what might not go well?
Well, I think that this is a very fun sort of element of the human side of the job, which is, at moments where you don't know the answer, at what point in your career do you have the confidence and the security to just say you don't know? And I would like to think that most CFOs have the maturity and the confidence to then raise their hand and say, as you know, I've not done M&A and I am requesting to bring in some help. I'm a quick learner. That's what got me here, but I'm going to need some help on running the model. If it's an LBO model and I've never built one, I'm going to bring in some advisors, right? From A&M or Palmtree or Alex or an investment bank or whatever. So having the confidence and courage to say that and then figuring out how to fund it and it not being too detrimental to the overall P&L, I think is the absolute way to go. I would not suggest faking it. I think that's a quick path to some devastating results when it comes to something like M&A. Test and learn is bad in M&A, is my point.
I think good advice. Good advice. We started talking a little bit about some stakeholder management and building trust with the CEO through multiple potentially challenging conversations, whether it's budgeting, growth versus profitability, trade-offs, offsites in Bali versus Phoenix, and through M&As. Let's talk about one of the other important stakeholders in a company, and that's the board. So given you've been a CFO as well as a board member, what do you think makes a good board member?
They come in different flavors. You need a chair of the audit committee who's got one skill that looks a lot more like a CFO. You'd ideally have an industry vet who can open doors and make introductions and who knows the history of the industry. You'd like to have someone who understands the product. So a perfect board would be a reflection of the needs of the company, the value levers in the company, and someone at the board level who can speak that language and ideally even add value. That, I think, is the ideal state of a board. A board that is not only A, helpful, but B, also has the integrity and the gravitas to drive the accountability and governance a board needs to drive. So playing both those roles. I think where boards often get denigrated or, execs roll their eyes about them, I have tons of friends who are VCs, love them to death, and many of them are excellent board members. I also know the very tried and true, paradigm of the VC who's never run a business and is telling the CEO and the team how to run their business and maybe doesn't even quite understand the business and hold water. And that becomes a pretty unproductive dynamic.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Hey, everybody. If you're a business owner or founder like me, you'll want to know more about our sponsor, Netsuite. Netsuite provides financial software for all your businesses. Whether you're looking for an ERP tool or accounting software, Netsuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make better decisions faster. And for the first time in Netsuite's 25 years as the #1 cloud financial system, you can defer payments of a full Netsuite implementation for 6 months. That's no payment and no interest for 6 months. And you can take advantage of the special financing offered today. Netsuite is #1 because they give your business everything you need in real time, all in one place to reduce manual processes, boost efficiency, build forecasts, and increase productivity across every department. More than 36,000 companies have already upgraded to Netsuite, gaining visibility and control over their financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, and more. If you've been checking out Netsuite already, then you know this deal is unprecedented. No interest, no payments. So take advantage of the special financing offer with our promo code at netsuite.com/turpentine. That's netsuite.com/turpentine to get the visibility and control your business needs to weather any storm. netsuite.com/turpentine. Today, I want to make a bit of a personal appeal to anyone working on a SaaS app or website. If you spend any time on the internet, you probably have interacted with chatbots in the bottom right corner of sites. Most are really annoying. AI is making them better, but still I often just get really useless generic answers out of these and end up just wanting to talk to a real human. It felt to me like AI shouldn't just make chatbots marginally better at text responses, but that they should enable a new type of web assistant, something that feels like you're talking to a human support agent who is co-browsing alongside you. Commandbar is building that user assistant. Companies embed it into their web app, mobile app, or website, and they get a fully generative chatbot that can give personalized responses that refer to a user's past chats, perform actions directly on behalf of the user, like looking up account info, and even start browsing alongside the user to show them how to do something, like a tour guide. It can also nudge users when they seem confused or frustrated. I love when I encounter Commandbar in websites. It's white labeled, but at this point I can tell right away. Commandbar already reaches more than 20 million end users with major customers like HashiCorp, Gusto, Freshworks, 6 Sense, and more. See for yourself at commandbar.com/MOZ or follow the link in the show notes.
There's a lot of cases in my experience, and feel free to disagree, where the preparation for a CFO heading into a board meeting can really make or break a certain type of meeting. And that is because there's a lot of questions that might get asked that you might know or not know the answer for. So I'd love to dive a little into 2 questions. One is, how do you prepare, or any recommendations of how to prepare in advance for board meetings for the uncertainty, the known unknown of the uncertainty of the question? Let's start there.
And you're asking it from the seat of the CFO, not as a director.
As a CFO.
That's right.
There's a lot of, I guess if I was to rephrase it, a lot of a board meeting is questions about the financials of a company.
Mhm.
How are we doing against plan? Which requires a lot of planning on your end because you might not know what questions are going to be asked or where you're going to dive into. What tips do you have? How do you prepare for your board meetings?
Yeah, there's two things a board is looking for from the CFO. We already kind of went through this, but one is good governance, clean, accurate risk management, compliance, know that insurance is done, button all that up so they can sleep well at night. And two is just knowing the numbers, being able to answer the question about sales attainment in APAC and how many reps we have over there. And I think if you mess up number one, similar to what we said earlier, you can just go home, right? So you need to be conversant in that and covered and give them the assurances they need and know your stuff there critically. Know about the gap financials, know about the insurance levels, know about your enterprise risk management. Then the numbers thing, the quickest way you can go sideways there is if the numbers are wrong. And I've seen that movie multiple times and it immediately shatters the confidence and the board is rightfully pissed. And you don't even get 3 strikes there. You might get 2, right? You might get 2 where if you materially screw up a number and it's noticed in the board meeting, you're toast as a CFO. So make sure that your controller, your VP finance, your teams, you're spending the time with them, impressing upon the need for accuracy and timeliness, but accuracy in that boardroom. But then the better part of your question is just sort of what can you do to really add value in there? And that is knowing the business holistically. So not just the metrics around financials and rep attainment and all of that, but being able to converse on key other areas of the business operationally with a financial lens.
Well, if you were to give advice for a CFO standing going to their first board meeting for the first time, we have make sure you have the button up for the compliance and the financials. What are some common questions maybe that you get? And maybe what's a question that you wish you got more often that you don't?
Oh, that's fun. Well, let's start with the common questions that you're going to get. You will get questions out of the blue and they might be testing you or they might actually want to know just casual questions like, remind me where we landed last quarter on ARR or how has net retention tracked over the last 3 years? And if you don't know and you have to say, and ideally you're mature enough to say you don't know, it just introduces friction, right? And it's like, oh, you don't know. You got to refer to the appendix in the deck. That's fine. That's fine. So hopefully you spend the time to learn your business and study it like you would as a college student, study a textbook, study it and go read old board decks and practice it with your finance team. But just know the business cold, know the numbers cold. That's really important. And now what do I wish I got asked is, well, what do you think? Right? So what that question is a fun one for CFOs. And of course, you're looking sideways at the CEO. You don't want to screw up that dynamic there and say something that will surprise the CEO. But the importance of the CFO should matter. If you have a good CFO and the board is coalescing around a decision, ideally the CFO is being heard in that. The CFO may say, well, look, I think I hear you all on this international expansion. And I do think we should do it. I just want to highlight that your goals for this are, I think, dangerously aggressive. We are not able to hire and pay people in those countries as of today. PEOs take time. So setting up a payroll situation out there with a third party, it will take time. And I just, frankly, guys, I need you to tamp down the expectations here and give me 6 months. That's what I think. And having the confidence to be able to because people get caught up in the excitement, Sasha. All right, we're going for it. We just crushed our plan last year. We're going international. Now let's do it. Like you have to be that person who's willing to say the womp womp kind of boring, wet blanket truth in the room. But if you're never asked, you might not get it out.
And is there any difference what are the marked differences that you see between board meetings that are venture backed versus private equity backed?
Well, one of the key differences there is the board dynamic itself. So in a PE-owned structure, the average PE firm will own, if it's a majority deal, between 80 and 90%. of the business, and then likely the management will own the rest, and or one or two small co-investors maybe that rolled with the deal. And so you're really, as the management, having a dialogue with the private equity firm. And the private equity firm is God in that situation, right? They have hire fire capability. They have majority control. Every decision, it almost becomes less formal because, the approvals are very simple. The board is literally staffed with the majority of voting being in the favor of the private equity firm. And so decisions are usually unanimous and usually pretty directive, or at least by the end of it, pretty directive. And it's really management having that dialogue with them. With a VC situation, depending on how many rounds, you could have up to 6 different VC directors in that room, or even more, right? And each of those directors is a minority shareholder. No one of them has more control than any other one. And so it can get very interesting, exciting, sloppy. The political element of those boards is the most interesting thing. Little alliances are developed, and maybe the earlier investors have different incentives than the later stage investors because they're in at different entry points, and they have clocks ticking in their fund. And so that's a whole other podcast, Sasha, that you, I'm sure, could talk about even more than me.
I want to start talking about, so you come in and you have experience across a lot of different aspects, which gets you to a really interesting place. When you start looking back at your career now, do you think your initial career as a CPA helped you or has hindered you in any way in becoming to CFO?
Well, there's no question it helped me because I started my academic career as a journalism major. And so I had to put some financial structure around my skill set to ever be useful in the world of business. And so that was the goal of the CPA as a springboard, a foundation and a springboard to investing and later operating. So there's no question it helped me. But I get that's not what you were really asking. I think you're probably asking, if I could ask you, Sasha, are you asking more, does that technical skill set of accounting, did that become useful to me later in life?
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If learning a new language is on your list, you absolutely need to check out Babbel. Babbel offers a range of learning tools, self-study app lessons, live classes, and even podcasts, which have always been my favorite way to learn. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel isn't just a game to kill time and make you feel like you're learning a language. It's not overly academic or rigid either. It's all about learning language for the real world. Babbel stands out because it's designed by real people using a modern conversational teaching approach. It's not always easy, nothing worth doing ever is, but it's straightforward and designed to help you start speaking in just 3 weeks. With Babbel, I was able to brush up on my intermediate Spanish to ramp up for travel to Argentina last year, and was able to set clear goals based on how much time each week I wanted to practice. Join millions of Babbel language learners across all age groups. Here's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only at babbel.com/Torenberg. That's babbel.com/Torenberg, spelled BABBEL.com/Torenberg. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Well, I guess if we think about it, there's a couple different paths of a modern CFO. There's people that come from a CPA background, and that was one of the more common background paths to the CFO. And then there's also investment banking or strategic finance that some came in. And so one argument would be a CPA helps prepare you because you understand the foundation and the fundamentals better. The counter argument sometimes can be being a CPA can hold you back in your success as a modern day CFO because you're not spending enough time thinking about the trade-offs like you talked about before. So how did you help make that transition to becoming that partner with the CEO?
This is such a fun question. It's widely discussed, right? The path to the CFO. Let's set the investment banker path aside, I think, for the purpose of this discussion, and just kind of boil it down to the accounting track versus the corporate finance track or the FP&A track. And it's been well discussed. And I think the argument many would consider is over that the corporate finance track, the FP&A track is the more likely shot, and the numbers would bear that out. But you go back 20 years and CFOs were all from the big four, maybe 30 years. And that was the track, a big four audit partner, get them in as CFO, because what we need is the CFO to cover those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the accuracy, the governance. And we don't really care, frankly, if the CFO thinks we should hire people in Europe or not. Like, let the chief revenue officer make those decisions, and the CFO will say yay or nay based on the budget. Of course, the role of the CFO has evolved. More strategic, more forward-looking. This is a well-discussed phenomenon. And therefore, the feeding system, the farm system, has evolved to fit that role. It's no longer a discussion at the top levels about your GAAP financials and accuracy and the governance and your enterprise risk management. It's a lot more of what you said, Sasha, the trade-offs. And I think that's wonderful for the CFO role. What I want to be careful about, and why I disagree the conversation is over, and I will bring this back to my path, I promise, is that I go back to you don't have anything if you don't have that foundation of governance and accuracy. You've got literally nothing. You might lose your business. And we've seen this happen time and time again. If it's not fraud, it's inaccuracies. It's not having capital on hand when you need it. It's going under. And I think the world is now, the pendulum swung. Oh, the CFO is totally strategic to bank. Oh yeah, but they can't leave behind, right? And it's settling somewhere in the middle. And so then that leads to the question, you probably need to be quite good at accounting and at least understand the principles of accounting and be able to hire a great controller and be able to advise on accounting policies around R&D and tax and all that. But you also need that strategic skill set to be able to discuss trade-offs and understand the business. So you need to be, frankly, a junior functioning CEO in that regard on the strategic stuff. So you got to have them both, right? And so the question is, where can you get them both? It was helpful to me because I got the accounting early. I have a master's in accounting. I passed my CPA. I was a practicing CPA for the first 3 years of my career. And I've never been upset or felt like that was wasted time, even remotely, right? I think that foundation was so important to who I am as a financial leader. And that's because I will always feel like I will get that locked in, the governance, the accuracy locked in before I move on to the higher order stuff. But I think either way, right? You can take the finance track, you can take the accounting track. Just know you're going to have to cross-pollinate at some point and take charge of your career and set it up to achieve those experiences.
So let's say you are somebody junior in your career. You're in a finance team, you're accountant, and you've worked your way up. What is the number one skill set, and how do you obtain that if you have a desire to be a CFO one day, but you're still in a core accounting role?
Let's give an example. For all the staff accountants out there right now, is a GL accountant, AP accountant who's thinking, oh, well, I'm listening to these guys and I want to be a CFO. So I know I need to cross-pollinate. What you want to do first and foremost is just be very good at your job and let your desires be known early. So, I've been in this role for a year, talking to my accounting manager. I really do want some experience in FP&A eventually. Is that something I can do here if I continue to knock it out of the park? If not, you got to switch jobs. If yes, then when the time comes, you got to find a piece of work you can bite off and start tackling. Let's take direct method cash forecasting as a perfect bridge. I call it a bridge because it sits between the treasury and the accounting and finance. So you say, all right, you're going to be the model owner for the direct method cash flow forecast now. You still have to do your day job. It's not going to get easier, right? You still have to process AP. You still have to make the month end accruals. You still have to go through the month end close. But now you're be adding on a piece of work that's forward looking, that's strategic, that starts to speak in the language of FP&A. And if you're good at that, then another bridge will be open to you. Well, now you get to do some support. You get to do a rotation in FP&A. You're going to support the R&D team during this budget cycle and on and on. And that, keep track of it, own your career, build the story. I was an accountant. I was good enough at that they gave me some FP&A work, but I never forgot the accounting. Why? I'm setting myself up to be a finance leader, a VP finance, and maybe someday a CFO.
What about if we take the flip side? The person that is the accountant comes up through the organization and gets to a place where they try that. Maybe they don't like it and they want to stick back to the accounting role. What advice do you give them in how to successfully work with a strategic CFO? Maybe a strategic CFO that doesn't come from an accounting background.
Yeah. Well, we think back to the basic need, the hierarchy of needs and that foundation of governance and enterprise risk management. That is such a big piece of work in any business, big or small. It's more than enough to build a career in just that piece, just being compliant and accurate. But what's not known about the role of the controller specifically is that it's also a big operational job, amazingly operational. And you can peel off all sorts of work in the business that is truly strategic. So when I talk about payroll, when I talk about treasury, when I talk about debt financing, when I talk about things like cash forecasting and even elements of IT, all that can be included in the operational accounting career. So let it not be misunderstood that accounting is not just bean counting. It is supporting the business in scaling toward its goals. You may not be saying, I want to hire 3 reps in Europe. No, your VP finance partner will be doing that, but you're going to figure out how to hire them, how to pay them. You're going to deal with the contracts ultimately that are locked in with vendors over there. So I don't want it to be, I get really annoyed when people denigrate the role of the controller. It's equally as important. You simply cannot state it any other way as their commensurate or like equivalent over on the finance side.
You've had such a fascinating career. And right now you're currently at Planful and you just posted, you guys are outperforming the market. What got you excited about being the CFO of a company that helps finance teams?
Yeah, well, I want to just clarify. We had a tremendous finish to 2023, which was so welcome because like most SaaS businesses, we found a lot of headwinds in the early part of the year. Still, we're growing, still very profitable, still healthy, but not up to our standards. And we erased those headwinds in the second half. And I am knocking on wood, very cautiously optimistic that we can take some of what happened in the second half of the year as an industry and continue to build on that the economy is stabilized. But we will see. It's an election year. I'm going to let smarter people than me prognosticate on that. So just want to make a comment on that. Yes, very proud of our end of the year. So if I could characterize your question.
You're working at a company that helps finance teams. So the role of a CFO in a company that helps finance teams has to be a hugely coveted job because you probably use the software yourself. Like, how do you even get that job?
Well, it came roundabout to me. I was working in private equity and was on the deal process and tagged to drop in as an interim at Planful, drop it in as an interim CFO, which I did, and then would go on to be CFO of a database company. But I was brought back in. My CEO and the team brought me back in after that database company exited because I was a good fit. And so I'll tell you why I think it worked out. The question is a good one. As a CFO of a company that sells to CFOs, you do get asked by prospects and customers alike to jump on a Zoom and talk about the product. How do you use it? Like, tell me the real, like peer-to-peer, the real weaknesses of the product and the real strengths of the product. So I am involved in a lot more of the go-to-market motion than probably the average CFO. And in addition to that, often we'll get on a stage or a podcast like this and talk about the business. But, that's kind of the cheesy side of it, I would say. But fundamentally, I enjoy and actually get joy out of knowing that what we're doing every day when we wake up and get to work is actually helping people like me and helping my own team, right? We live in the product at Planful. We live in Planful at Planful and are, what we think best in class users, hopefully best in class users of the platform. And that really resonates with me. It feels like I do have a mission, and that mission is to help people like me and like my teams out there be better at their jobs.
For any listeners that are living under a rock, tell us a little bit more about what is Planful and what is it that you love about it?
Yeah. So Planful is classic SaaS, best-in-class platform for budgeting, analytics, reporting for the enterprise. Now, we started, it's important to know, in finance and accounting, doing things like automated consolidation. Anyone listening who's done consolidation in a spreadsheet knows it's the most painful thing you can do. So that's now automated, right? And we're next generation platform in that space. We handle automated reporting. You think about how painful it is to dump your trial balance out into an Excel spreadsheet, a 3-statement model, and balance everything out. And by the time you get it all spun up into your GAAP financials, you have no time to analyze it, do MD&A. We do that at the push of a button. Yeah, you got to set it up at implementation, link the accounts, but imagine pushing a button, getting your GAAP financial statements after month-end close. And then on the planning side, granular atomic unit planning templates and workforce planning in the cloud, totally connected, linked with collaboration, commenting, change logs, and solving what if analysis. It's all this beautiful functionality that is meant to replace the offline disconnected spreadsheet world that most businesses rightly start in. So let me stop there. That is the platform for finance.
And what is your personal favorite feature about Planful?
My personal favorite feature about Planful, now this is a CFO speaking, is the dashboards. So I have my homepage set to, what I think about this, Sasha, is like, and we could get into a fun conversation around Gen AI and co-pilots and where this space is headed. But I spend a lot of my time asking and answering very high level questions. We gave the example about rep attainment and APAC, but even just saying like, how many devs do we have in the business? And how many devs did we have 4 years ago? And how many are we trying to serve? So, so we doubled our devs last year and now we're talking about adding another 60. Can we even do this, right? These are the conversations I'm trying to have in the business. And so being able to set up dashboards that answer 80% of my questions with a few clicks, no more than 5 clicks, drill down, there's rep attainment in APAC, is hugely valuable to me and valuable to my VP Finance and FP&A team because they don't have me slacking them for those questions. So that's why I love dashboards. It's sort of my, minority report, beep, 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 answer all the questions I want answered, or at least 80% of them.
And where can users find Planful?
Planful.com is our website. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Dan Fletcher that works at Planful, so that shouldn't be too hard. But we're all over the place. You listen to this podcast, who knows? You may get served an ad after.
Hopefully. All right. So normally we'd end it there, but I can't not ask you about what's your thoughts on the future of AI in the industry?
Yes. So AI, I am not, let me just state, full disclaimer, not the expert here. Okay. This is 2 guys on a podcast riffing about what AI could mean for FP&A tools, planning tools. What excites me the most, there are sort of 2 levels. Number 1, it's the administration of these platforms. So Planful is one of the few cloud-based financial planning analysis systems that is truly owned and operated by finance. So you are the admin because it's easy enough to admin. Low code, no code, it's easy to do it. That said, when you want to create a user, you still have to go into the module to create a user and enter all the permissions and all that. What if you could just type into a chatbot and say, create Sasha a user, give them the same permissions as Dan, with the exception of they don't have access to former versions of the plan in previous years. Bang. The user has been created. Great. Email Sasha his login and tell him congratulations. He's now joining Planful, right? I put like that type of co-pilot capability around admin really excites me. But even more exciting is the chat GPT version trained on your data and only your data and trained on the data lake. Every question I ask, I can not only get the answer quickly, like I do now with my dashboards, but I can start to ask the next level questions. Well, what would it have been if they had the same attainment as LATAM, which was better last year? Bang. Oh, okay. And what do we think caused their lack of attainment? Oh, they had no pipeline. And what did we spend on pipeline in APAC? Oh, nothing. Okay. Got it. All right. So it looks like I need to tell, maybe then you could say, email or Slack my CMO and ask him if he would like some budget for demand gen in APAC, right? Like that, I think is where these systems are going to be headed. I think we're a year or 2 away from that level of competency, but it's exciting. You can see the vision.
I think that's the part that I'm the most excited about as well, is connecting people directly to the data in a more conversational way without having to learn how to code SQL or Python or some next generation sort of computer language in order to answer the questions. Like, what the question is, how hard is it to get the answer? I think it's going to be really exciting. Well, Dan, thank you so much for what a wonderful episode. Any final words before we end the recording?
No, Sasha, just my absolute pleasure. Go to planful.com. Find me on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more, just say hi. And Sasha, you're a great host. Thank you for a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for tuning in to Turpentine Finance. Share with your executive team, direct reports, friends, and family. And if you want to support the show, the best ways are to leave a review wherever you're listening and subscribe. Turpentine Finance is part of Turpentine, the podcast network behind Moment of Zen, Turpentine VC, Age of Miracles, and more. Shows for experts by experts in tech.